Now, life is filled with enigmas. Those unanswerable questions that have long since been left for poets and philosophers to decipher for us. Paul actually puts these three enigmas together in one verse, in 1 Corinthians 13:13, that well-known verse. So now, faith, hope, and love abide. These three, but the greatest of these is love. Well, love is the greatest because in heaven there will be no need for faith and hope, but there will be love. Because we don't need to have faith because we're already there. We don't need to hope for something because we've already got it. However, what exactly is love? Well, mankind has tried for millennia to define it. Even the experience of it, however, has sometimes left man scratching their heads as they try to explain what exactly it is. And what about faith? How do you explain an life-governing belief that is sometimes without any evidence at all? And that brings us to hope. Hope is one such mysterious concept. Even though we may have experienced it, explaining it seems to be a different story altogether. In the 4th century BC, the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle tried but failed to expand our understanding when he said, hope is a waking dream. That doesn't do anything for me, but he said hope is a waking dream. Robert Ingersoll, the 19th century writer, didn't really help either when he commented, hope is the only bee that makes honey without flowers. One of the most famous of such hope quotes comes from the 7th century poet Alexander Pope, and you will all know this one. He penned the famous line, hope springs eternal in the human breast. That does something for me, that's fine. Over the centuries, thousands of such words have been written on the subject as great minds struggle to discover what hope is and where it comes from. In all the confusion, however, everyone agreed on one thing, the importance of hope. The well-known Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky, well, that man, you know him anyway. I've been practicing that all week and it's gone rubbish. Perhaps the greatest psychological, spiritual, and medical need that all people have is the need for hope. I think we would all agree with that. Today, psychologists have weighed in on the subject, suggesting that being without hope actually tends or leads to mental illness. The opposite of hope, they say, isn't simply hopelessness, but despair, a deep despondency that for some sadly leads to suicide. Research has shown that people without hope are more likely to lead unhappy lives, struggle socially, perform poorly academically, and less likely to be able to cope with the difficult issues of life. Without the ability to picture the brighter future that hope provides, people often give up trying to improve their lives because they believe that they are helpless to make things better. Ever felt like that sometimes? People without hope often withdraw, no longer able to interact or contribute to their communities around them. Unfortunately, the world today is facing what is being called a crisis of hopelessness. Countless people suffering from depression and despondency are increasing all over the globe, as many feel engulfed by an ugly and uncertain world where they have no power to affect. Those same psychologists tell us that Billy Graham was, I missed something out here. I'll go back to it because that makes sense of what I've just read. Sorry about that. The late Billy Graham couldn't have made it clearer when he wrote, perhaps the greatest psychological, spiritual, and medical need that all people have is the need for hope. I'll read that again. Perhaps the greatest psychological, spiritual, and medical need that all people have is the need for hope. So those same psychologists tell us that Billy Graham was right. Hope is an essential ingredient in a person's mental and physical health and overall well-being. Hopeful people, interestingly, are able to maintain a positive outlook despite the difficulties they encounter or the negative circumstances that surround them. They are more likely to be successful, do better academically, and are less likely to experience anxiety or sadness. They have a higher level of self-confidence and are less likely to suffer self-doubt. Interestingly, studies have shown that hopeful people have a stronger immune system. Moreover, if they do become ill, they are more able to cope and reach full recovery. The Oxford Dictionary defines hope as a feeling or desire, wanting something to happen or to be the case. Well, if that's true, then hope would be no different from optimism. A passive belief that things will just get better, that the glass is half full, or that every cloud will have a silver lining. It reduces hope to a desire that things will change that's not undergirded by an assurance that things will. I'm sure we have all heard statements like, I sure hope I get a new job. I hope I can get a new car somehow. I just hope things will be better. I'm sure we've all said things like that. They portray hope that has become wishful thinking based on uncertainty. Alexander Pope believed that people continue to hope in the wake of unmet expectations because hope is programmed into the DNA of every human being. However, even though hopeful people can be found everywhere, the fact that hopelessness and despair are on the rise around the world flies in the face of some sort of genetic predisposition. The late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the renowned Orthodox rabbi, philosopher, theologian, and author, suggested that everyone, regardless of a hopeful nature, experiences those moments in their lives when they know where they are and where they want to be, but cannot see a route from here to there. Thus, he says in the prelude, he said is the prelude to despair. Those are the times, he believed, when the Bible is the only lifeline. We need only remember the stalwart men and women of God who face the same dilemma, and we can find strength we need to keep going. He reminds us that Moses suffered a complete mental breakdown in Numbers chapter 11. He became so discouraged with the Israelites that he cried out to God, "Why have you dealt ill with me, your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give them birth?" He finally takes a step over the line from anger and depression to despair when he says, "I am not able to carry all this people alone. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once." Pretty rock bottom stuff, that, isn't it? Moses wasn't the only one. David, the greatest warrior and king in all of Jewish history, wrote much of the book of Psalms, where he constantly revealed his moments of despair. One of the famous ones, he cried out in Psalm 42, verse 11, "Why art you cast down, O my soul?" And in Psalm 22, verse 1, his despairing heart wondered why God had forsaken him. And in Psalm 88, verses 5 to 7, left him as a man with no strength, lying in a pit, abandoned amongst the dead. In 1 Kings 19 and 3 and 4, and we looked at this last year in the home group, Elijah, the prophet of prophets, became so despondent and he ran away into the desert, sat down under a broom tree and begged God to kill him. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, Hannah, the mother of the spiritual giant Samuel, was so despondent, her prayers were wordless, gut-wrenching moanings that sounded like one too drunk to speak. And in the passage we've just had read, Job 3, 1-12, Job suffered extreme depression as the enemy of his soul brought catastrophe after catastrophe upon him. And in his despair, he cursed the day of his own birth and wished he had never been born. There were others as well, including Jeremiah and Jonah, all of whom dealt with despair. Yet they emerged hopefulness intact to fulfill the will of God for their lives and become examples of the power of hope to billions of believers throughout time. They were able to do so because they understood hope in its biblical sense. For them, hope wasn't wishful thinking or simple passive optimism. It wasn't a maybe thing. It was a sure thing. Hope was confident expectation, a strong expression of faith in the God who is the source of hope. It was a rock that they could stand on. We know that famous verse in Hebrews 11, verse 1. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. That's why our biblical heroes hoped where there was no hope, believed when believing made no sense at all. Finally, in those moments when they gave in to despair, God was there. He didn't just pat Moses on the head and whisper, "Don't worry, son, everything will be okay." Instead, he gave Moses instruction on how to lighten his load, how to move forward and make things better. As Elijah stood on the mountainside in the midst of a storm and earthquakes, God didn't say to him, "Just think positively, Elijah. Tomorrow will be a brighter day." What did he do? He asked, "Where are you doing here, Elijah?" Then he sent Elijah back to accomplish all that God had called him to do. Job was rewarded as he fathered more children, grew more crops, tended more animals. Hannah continued to trust, to try until at last God gave her the son that she had believed him for. These biblical characters knew the difference between passive optimism and real hope that requires tenacity, persistence, and courage to do whatever God instructed them to do to make their hope a reality. Throughout the entire Bible, there are two words that are used interchangeably: truth and trust. Trust is defined as a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of the object trusted, leading to unshakable confidence. This is the biblical definition of hope. Paul said, "I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I have committed to him against that day." A sure, certain hope. In Psalm 37, David has written an ode to hope. It's quite a long psalm. Here he speaks at length of the trustworthiness of God, his faithfulness to the righteous, his love for justice, and the beautiful future that awaits those who hope in him. He also tells us what we should look like as we wait on him. Don't fret, he says several times, or be envious. Delight yourself in the Lord. Commit yourself to his ways. Trust him and wait patiently for him. Don't be angry. Rest in the Lord and know that the future of the wicked will be cut off. At the same time, he will always be our strength in times of trouble. He will never fail to help us and deliver us because we hope in him. Perhaps Alexander Pope was partially right with his suggestion that God has programmed hope into human DNA. There are those who believe that the birth of hope can be traced right back through time to the creation itself. As God told the story of the formation of the earth and the heavens, he could have said, "There was morning and there was evening," a phrase that makes sense to our human minds. But he didn't. Just think about that. What did he say? He said there was evening first, and then there was morning. In his narrative, we are told that twilight will come and proceed into deeper and deeper darkness until the inevitable moment when light dawns bright. Then, like an army on horseback, those rays will charge forth and defeat the darkness until light prevails and all is well again. A demonstration of Psalm 18, verse 28, where he says, "My God turns my darkness into light." Every day, a living reminder of the power of hope in God. One verse that reminds me of that is Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 12. Remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of promise, without hope and without God in this world. But now, in Christ Jesus, you who once were far away have been brought near through the blood of Christ. We have a hope that is certain, gone through the curtain and touching the throne. We have a priest who is there interceding, pouring his grace on our lives day by day. We have a hope, brethren. Get out there and tell people they're desperate.